Greetings.
Greetings, Metax. It's great to connect with you again.
Greetings, Christy. It's likewise. I'm aware it's not as much time frame in your world. It would be in other increments. For me, it's just easier to connect to your frequencies of those that are present here that have present their energy in a similar fashion in what you would consider a time frame. For me, it represented still as a connectivity and energy.
Yes, I enjoy connecting with you. It's sometimes I feel like I'm an alien consciousness in a human body, so sometimes it's just nice to have that interaction.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to talk to you on a topic that's been on my mind, and the topic's overconsumption in general. And I guess I'm looking at it a more worldview, whether overconsumption with food, substances, material goods, and then, of course, those impacts on humans and their environment. And just having some general anger, upset towards maybe those that have the overabundance of resources that are kind of creating this inequity. And also some of these folks trying to leave the planet thinking they're just going to ditch it all is just really infuriating to me. And I know there's learning lessons, but I feel that ultimately the environment and future generations are going to pay for this, for their decisions in some of these ways. And just being in general upset that a lot of sick people seem to be the one making the decisions. And I just wanted you to talk on that because I feel like it's something that it affects all of us that are incarnated here. And I just think it's an interesting topic to speak on for a moment.
Mm-hmm. I understand where you're coming from. The concept you're bringing up, of course, the idea of overconsumption of anything is first and foremost within the individual. Desire to hold on to things is likely also a storage of emotionality if you're considering just some form of suppression, for example, something that's sedating, so therefore something you don't want to come up for however long in your time frame. You want to stretch the idea of not letting something come up, if you will. You can use your so-called junk food that contains such substances, and many of your processed food you can purchase in many of your perhaps more mainstream shopping aisles. Of course, your alcohol idea and other similar poisons, smoking ideas, possibility. I'm not judging anyone for such a decision. I don't recommend it necessarily either, but it is what you can do and what many of you are doing for that very reason. Now, on the other topic, first and foremost, remember all of you are on this world not by accident. Nothing ever happens to any living entity for any other reason other than their own involvement on some higher level, whether you're upset in the moment or not, and there's nothing wrong with being upset either. It can also be for a good reason and drive you towards a direction that's helpful. So don't suppress your anger because of the idea that everything happens for a reason, so you shouldn't be angry. So your anger also happens for a reason and might be propelling you in a direction, yet you should be taken and maybe have not taken or have decided not to take for what you consider a while. So therefore you're being propelled then with some more force behind it, which then translates to anger in your personal experience. Anybody's always paying a price, if you will, or getting a reward for what they're sending out. Doesn't necessarily mean that somebody being in a difficult situation did something bad and now they're suffering the consequences in a direct manner, but on a higher level that's the case. Ultimately also staying in a certain bad situation, you're suffering the consequence because of your decision to stay there. On a higher level, everything is balanced out. Of course, also your world, the way it is now, is structured in a not ideal manner, to put it mildly. So you can consider those people sick that are in certain positions that are perhaps psychopathic in your own terms. It's more service to self likely and lack a certain understanding, and they are decided to learn this lesson in a very hostile manner and in order to drive themselves into a wall with such a method. But there is always, how you're calling it, it takes two to tango. In this case, you're tangoing as an entire species, and it apparently takes a few billion humans on planet Earth to tango in this case. You're all sending out your frequency to create this together. Not that you're all being in a similar fashion selfish, but perhaps you're doing to yourself or to someone close to you or through whatever you're projecting onto, what you appear and what you're then perceive as anger is being done outside of you. Or you're just lasting out and waiting for another shoe to drop that's showing no sign of dropping. So in order for perhaps more things to come up and be processed, the ideal idea would be to be more outspoken yourself as well. Also things you might think might ruffle some feathers, especially if you're being propelled forward with what you described as anger, is perhaps a sign it's a good time and idea to bring certain concepts also in a conflicting nature forward in order to have a constructive conflict in some sort. I'm also aware that, for example, something the reptiles have also bashed on for a while they're coming perhaps from another extreme, the idea of virtual concepts being always harmony and no idea of any upheaval. I do agree, the idea that there can be indeed conflict, and also the idea of learning lessons through conflict is valuable for many that are in that situation. And if you are in that state of being that you describe as anger, then it's likely a great sign that for you it might be at a time when you wish to process some of this through having an open conflict with whoever you deem necessary to act this out with. Now, as you're talking about future generations, those are also going to be souls that are incarnated or have incarnated for their own reasons, and they're also creating a part and parcel in this co-creation on your current world, and they also volunteer for whatever they wish to live in, and if your planet should become barren and dead for a large part in the worst case scenario, which I don't see as a great possibility unless you decide to engage in nuclear conflict, and those that decide that to incarnate in the bodies that still can somewhat exist would also come there particularly to have those experiences. It all comes back to the idea that you all create your own reality, quite obviously, and as simple as this concept is, it still stands. But don't hesitate to also create conflict. Those two concepts are not contradictory as many in Europe perhaps spiritually aligned field believe or create for themselves, that just because everybody creates their own reality, you should stay away from doing so. And the concept also perhaps very familiar in some religious teaching, in some of the religions that are perhaps more inclined towards a hands-off approach. So in order, since experiences might bring you pain and suffering, you stay away from them completely. I think it's more important to learn certain lessons. So therefore, you create your own reality and you feel pulled to speak up or create some conflict and upheaval. then that is also a way to create reality. You always have a guidance post if you start feeling better by expressing anger, then that's the right idea. But if you have the sensation that your heart is closing down, so at times, for example, very familiar with, or you get yourself in situations where you suddenly don't seem to be at the right point, in the right place, when you pick a physical fight with somebody that you seem to be losing, or then you likely went off the wrong track somewhere. So it's important to have a good guidance system when you're decide to engage in conflict. So you have the best learning lesson, as everybody involved has the best learning lesson. And once you understand why the conflict happens, you will likely also then transmute whatever energy there was behind it that you might have with someone in your immediate surrounding, or with your collective, or with someone out here, or with your leaders, or those you perceive to be your leaders, etc.
Yeah, thank you. I definitely do have some integration with this. Be interesting how it transpires, in what way. But with the few minutes I have left, I wanted to ask about my current feline companion. And I just wanted you to check in with her and how she's doing. I feel like there's some past life or maybe early life influence because she was with other humans before me, and some fear with heights. And it just in general, I just wondered if you could check in and kind of tell me how she's doing and what that's about.
Mild sadness, otherwise. Might be related to a certain fear. Cannot pick up with like an exact memory where she might have had any form of outward experience that led to her now being in a state of being afraid of height from a time frame. Well, speaking from your perspective, if you would open up to her further, that would certainly help her, and maybe also raise some inner sadness. Also remember feline companions as you have in your world sometimes, if you choose to, are transmuting your energy as well, and anybody in the vicinity. So also processing your energy and being of service in such a manner. So therefore, the best way to relate to your feline companions by getting in a similar frequency, have more of, for example, spending more physical time, of course, with physical touch. In general, be aware that you are in your own energy field, and once your energy fields are overcrossing by you being in the same vicinity, then she'll automatically have to process your energy. Of course, I could go off on tangents of other lifetimes or physical interaction with another entity in your lifetime, but eventually any experience you can have with her, or of course also with anybody else, including me, can also be the perception of a version of the entity that is indeed the reflection of what you are currently capable of perceiving. Doesn't mean she doesn't exist in the same way as you exist on your own. However, the co-creation and the perception, anything that rings up anything in you, is also, of course, then being processed in you and through you, and vice versa, of course. You could say you're also processing her energy. And there's no need to make matters unnecessarily complicated. Just open up your heart, get into a certain frequency range, like the one that I'm pulsing out right now to the best of my ability, to pull you all towards my frequency as you're currently interacting with me. When you're in the frequency with her, and then she should have an easier time meeting you halfway. And any distance there might still be between you that might hinder any further interaction that you desire will likely be transmuted in the easiest way possible without necessity to understand the details of any particular process that you two are currently in your co-creation. I hope this is somewhat helpful. Otherwise, tune into my frequency anytime you are in the vicinity of her, and that should be the easiest way to process anything. And always also be aware that any entity in your world is coming, going, and having experiences that are to their greatest benefit, and they have their own free will, and they're also
Yeah, thank you for that reminder. I forget about the energy fields crossing and processing some of mine. And thank you for the tips there. I think that would help as well. So I appreciate you
I
very much.
appreciate you as well. I love you and I love her, and so does she.
Yeah, definitely. All right. Well, I think it's time for the rest of the queue. So up next is Zach.
Greetings, Metax.
Greetings, Zachariah.
Do you need any water?
That would be a good idea, but you can go ahead and ask whatever you wish to inquire.
Okay, great. I'm holding a small dog, a Shih Tzu breed. I'm holding the dog against my chest right now. Can you feel her energy?
Picking up on your frequency and picking up on a canine frequency, as you just mentioned. I don't necessarily pick up whether you're pressing the animal to your chest or what exactly the animal is doing. They're of course not as easy as someone of my species, the aforementioned feline, for example. So the dog could as well also be in another room or wherever, and I would probably pick up a similar frequency simply by the fact that you're bringing up the consciousness and you're connecting to the animal.
Okay. Is there any differences in my energy that stand out compared to the last time we connected?
They seem more centered, of course, could also be because you're sharing frequency with a dog.
I see. Is there a feline counterpart in your civilization or another feline that you can tell me about that I'm connected with?
Members of our council that would be willing to reach out that you can connect with if you desire. Now aware they just made certain concept and restrictions for current interaction to make it go more smoothly without dead air, so to speak, jumping back between beings. But if you want to talk to her, for example, you can do so in a more private setting, I assume. It's something you would have to arrange with him then, but just I'm letting you know I have the capacity to connect you to her, for example, as she just showed some interest when you brought this up, but of course I cannot connect you to a male if you so more desire, or anyone else in our kind that has a more greater interest in whatever you are currently going through and considers themselves to be of a better match, or she is the one that is currently the most interested in your current state of being.
For what reason in particular?
Because of your current struggles and interests that you're having in your life that is peculiar. Remember, we are a very curious species, and she has a certain interest in studying entities in your world. And, well, don't see it as a zoological interest, it's somewhat like it, but it's not just the way you're looking at some beings of what you consider another nature in your zoos. It is also more of a development aid interest guidance somewhere there if you so wish. It's not necessarily a genetic relation or an oversoul connection or something like it, but remember, whatever frequency you're pulsing out will always attract somebody of some nature, no matter what species you're talking about, that will be a match. In her case, she's not necessarily on the same frequency range as you are, but she is interested in the energies.
I see. Interesting. That's cool. I'll definitely reach out more and try to connect with that. Is there a name you could give me?
You remember her names in our world looks different, but you can call her Saran.
Saran?
Saran.
Okay. Okay, cool. And then I'm kind of using you as a go-between a little bit with these questions, but is there a message that Kalask that you could relate to me from Kalask?
Something specific in particular to you personally?
Yeah, for me personally. You said there's nothing in specific.
I'm trying to connect to them to a certain degree without necessity to bring their energy in play for David's
Right. Yeah, if it's gonna
well-being.
mess with David's energy, then you don't have to.
Just the idea of grounding.
Okay. All right.
Also, the overseer or council was proven previously through David. I believe we termed him a king, even though we don't use the term, but that status has a certain interest to interact with you if you so desire. It is not a main interest compared to surround, but there's a certain peculiarity and perhaps if you want to talk to him and manage to reach out, there would be an interest, that's all.
Okay, that's exciting. Thank you for sharing that. If you were me, what question would you ask in this session? What question would you ask yourself?
What is the best way in my current state of being as just the only state that matters to increase my frequency to the greatest way possible?
And the answer to that?
So would simply be to open your heart. In your current vicinity, also including the canine.
Do you have anything specific? Is there any blockages that you see? Anything more specific? Tell me why I'm not opening it more.
You're nervous, a certain fear. Well, it's really not that complicated. It's always the same in any entity. It's always a fear of love. We are the reptiles in the very common state of being because their own civilization and their own development, which was necessary to have a very peculiar and interesting experience of what it is like to be completely cut off from a state of what you consider love. It's a learning lesson they had to go through, so in their case, a very extreme version. But ultimately, any fear of love is always the restricting reason. The only fear really is the fear of love anyway. Because when you're not afraid of love, there can be nothing else you're afraid of, because you're automatically at the right state anywhere. The fear of connectivity, perhaps to some degree exposure. Really, there are many possible options, but ultimately exposure plays a certain role. Opening up, obviously. But ultimately, it's the fear of being in a state of love itself, as I mentioned previously. It's usually not what you are, I believe, communicating with Suneta. It's the idea that you're not afraid of what could be negative, but very often more what could be good or what could be best, and you're just shying away from because there's likely then the idea of what comes beyond it, and is there anything, and the fear of dissolving, etc. And you can keep yourself in that limbo state for as long as you wish, as there's no time and judgment for your decision. Just know that it's only you who's keeping yourself there, and nobody else can remove you from there or keep you there against your will.
Okay, thank you for that. I got about 4 minutes left. For the last 4 minutes, I'll just let you share whatever you feel the group needs to hear.
Yeah.
And thank you, Metax. I love you.
Much love to you, Zachariah, and thank you for the willingness to give your time, so to speak. So I'll just capitalize on that and emphasize further what I've just been bringing up to you personally. Of course, the general idea as we're speaking as a current group here, for anybody who's listening to this, at another point of what you consider time frame. Everybody in a so-called group is bringing their energy forward, and the whole group collective consciousness is more than the sum of its parts. Or the more also the idea being that the chain is only as strong as its weakest link, and in the form of energy, instead of course anybody that's bringing energy to the group can influence it to a certain degree. Everybody is attracted to a certain group to a certain point in time for a certain reason, and also of course therefore reflecting in one way, shape, or form of each other. So therefore, everybody in the vicinity present opening their heart further would of course then also benefit the Sakurai person as well as vice versa, of course, but it's only possible as far as people are then willing to feed off the energy each other while still keeping their energy intact. Also bridging the gap between the beings currently present to the best ability that I have without having a negative effect on either David's current form or my capability of connecting to you to a certain degree. In other words, I have to meet you all halfway, or I work with all of your consciousness fields, connect them to get them best of my ability, and then I interact with your consciousness field that you now term a group, and from there on out I branch out to every individual that's currently present. Is of course a much more intimate and easier version in your so-called one-on-one interaction, even though in this case it's more like 3 because I'm speaking through David and his filtering idea of the verbal language that's being used while I'm speaking, or sending frequency which then comes out as speaking, and vice versa. You're speaking to the ear canal of him while I'm picking up them from what's there then in his brain in terms of acoustic perception, and then go back and forth. It's a three-way of connectivity. The more there are in a group, of course, the stronger is the energy in terms of quantity being somewhat of a quality itself. However, I also have to divide my energy to a certain degree between everybody present and interact with this group collective entity basically that we create here together. And of course, I also always have to go through that, so it always depends how far anybody in the current collective is capable of opening up further, just as an explanation of the process I'm going through, and the limits that I also have when I'm interacting with you, because your oversoul level also needs to allow me to connect to all of you to a certain degree, otherwise I will not overstep those boundaries as, for example, the reptiles likely would. In the last moments, I will probably stuff with some water and David while we're here.
Well, hey, Metax, I guess I'll start asking my question while you're drinking. Yeah, first of all, hopefully my internet connection hopefully is working better today than it was last time. But if I sound like I'm cutting out, let me know. But anyway, like my first question would be similar to one of Zach's questions. Like, can you perceive any blockages preventing my heart from opening further, or like, do you have any general advice for how I can, like optimize my life? Like be more. I don't know how to word it, but yeah, like how do I open my heart further?
Same general advice just shared. Second, also in general, it was also directed at everybody, as was intended. The idea not being afraid of a state of love is really the only key, and also becoming aware that the only fear you possibly ever have is that of love. However, obviously a certain stress factors in all of your lives at all times is perfectly normal. Don't resist those, also let them come up and be there, otherwise they'll just increase. Be more loving first and foremost towards yourself, of course, and let it spill out to others, always in that direction. But those are all things your conscious mind is well aware of. You can, of course, also open your third eye further, instead of just focusing only on the heart and then connect to my frequency or anybody else out here. Something I, of course, always recommend also to David, even though he is usually not talking to me, but other members of my kind, especially the third person we termed king, as well as his own personal connections from other lifetimes. So it might not be intense what I'm sharing with anybody there. So for example, if you have a certain contact person here, you can easily reach out to them in specific or certain interest in anybody over here. Or of course, if you don't, just connect to me. And then see how it goes. Not everybody necessarily enters a state of deep bliss when connecting to our kind. I'm very well aware that David does, obviously, for his reasons, and some other members in your species that resonate more with our kind because they have incarnations here as well. For them, it's likely easier, but remember, there's also a reason you feel pulled right here. You're currently here in the vicinity, even if you had an interest in talking to the reptiles or somebody else, but now it just happens to be me here. There's a reason for anybody having any interaction ever with any entity. And likely you can benefit from that particular connection, otherwise you wouldn't interacting with us. Remember, I'm not God, I'm not the source of everything, I'm also just a spokesperson for my particular kind, and I'm speaking from our particular vantage point, and I sometimes find it not quite comprehensible why people in your world decide to have certain experiences that are likely less than enjoyable. However, I also understand by incarnating and having memories of incarnation in lower dimensionalities the necessity of certain learning lessons. So basically, the most I can offer you is to connect to our kind and see how far this can take you. I can give you more general concept of opening your heart in any species, etc., but that would likely not bring my own energy and anything that I can do you as much forward as associated with my species as the one where I have most love for, and therefore can get us deep in this state of being. Of course, you can also connect to more human-like entities out here. We had your stereotypical inhabitants of the Pleiades, which just are not necessarily just there. Just those stereotypical entities also exist in other galaxies, and also, of course, there are numerous in those particular star clusters. But if you have a better relation to your own more human-like looking beings, for example, you can of course do so as well, or connect to entities that give you more of a state of loving and kindness. But again, I can easily guide you through the process of being connected to our kind from there on. It is likely easiest to get into your heart. Just don't forget to remain grounded and tend to your lower chakras as well. Don't get into the point that some people that identify as being more spiritual in your world do, that shun their lower chakras as non-spiritual and then get ungrounded. Then you just create problems for yourself that will then later probably close your heart down again if you don't take them with you. So no matter if you start from the top or from the bottom of your energetic system, make sure that you always hit all of those points. And when it comes to the heart, yes, just connect to me and my kind.
Okay.
You can, of course, also use certain artwork depictions of our kind that have been produced. It's fairly accurate enough for, of course, if you spend time with a physical feline companion in your world, that's always the best way to work as an antenna.
Okay, yeah, speaking of that, like right next to my laptop at my desk right now, I have that picture, I have that drawing that Vecca did of you, like that hand drawing of you standing like your whole body top to bottom. Yeah, like I have it like sitting here next to my desk. I've had it there for like 6 months or something. Anyway, yeah, like something you were talking about a minute ago reminded me of something you were talking about like a few days ago. You said like you think that I'm more interested in talking to reptilians than felines, which like I'm not sure. I don't think that's right exactly. I mean, maybe like subconsciously, but I mean, I love you guys just as much as the reptilians. Like, I have two cats. I have your picture like right here next to me all the time. I look at it every day. I don't know. Like, I mean, I love alligators too. Like, I grew up around alligators, and Steve Irwin, who I plan on asking you about next, is like my all-time hero, and he loved alligators. So I mean, I love alligators too. Like, I mean, I love class too, but it's not mutually exclusive. I don't think I like them more than you. I don't know. I think I like you guys both evenly. But anyway, yeah, I only have a few minutes left, so like maybe like I guess I'll go on to like my next topic. Yeah, like I talked to Kalask a few times about Steve Irwin, like the so-called crocodile hunter. Do you, I mean, like, do you know who that is, like through David or through Kalask?
I have some relations and the memories, and indeed I can go through the reptiles, and I'm aware you have a close connection also to my kind. It's just when I connect to you at the reptilian connectivity over ways, but it's perhaps also likely that is due to the fact that any frequency similar more to my own of a feline nature seems more normal, so therefore the discrepancy in the frequency with the reptile is more outstanding if you wish. To me it still comes across in such a manner, but it's not really important. I know that you have a close emotional willingness to open up to my frequency as well and people over here. And with the person that you just mentioned, I'm picking up from the frequency and the storage of information in David's subconscious, and of course also directly from the reptiles. And since it's a question connected to reptiles, I go over that bridge.
Okay, like, is it possible for you to connect to like the higher self of Steve Irwin directly, like, and exchange messages, kind of like you did with the Jesus person?
To some degree, remember, when your person is disincarnating, it's not necessarily the same ego personality, for example, and even if they are still incarnated, but they're not physically fully conscious of their life mission or their oversoul connections or whatever you want to call such, then I can connect to the oversoul, but it's not the equivalent to the ego individual under this particular name and label that you know a person during their incarnation. That of course also applies to you.
Right. Well, I mean, I don't know how much of an answer you'll be able to get on this question, but like, can you like either ask his higher self or read from their filing cabinet, however it works, like why he chose to die so early, so young?
Likely because he was simply finished.
Okay, but I mean, he had two kids. Like, why didn't he stick around longer?
In a life that beings in your world live aren't necessarily over, when from a physical perspective everything seems perfect and finished. That is never the case anyway, not in your third dimensionality. But when what was decided to be lived out in your world comes to pass, and everything is said and done, you can have an accident if you wish, or just die in bed, doesn't make much of a difference. And of course, you can also invite somebody else to help you along in one way or the other, or do it yourself. But remember, in certain junctures of your history, there were much longer and much shorter time frames of lifespans that people had, because what could have been experienced during a lifetime in any period of your time, be that hundreds of thousands of years ago, or your more modern humans just thousands of years ago, you have much longer and then much shorter lifespans compared to the one you have now. And that's simply being due to the reason that people collectively could experience more or less in your world at certain junctures, and sometimes you rush through life. So that's also why we over here have a different attitude towards death, as it's not really what you might consider such. It's just a transitioning because the person has simply finished what they wanted to accomplish, and even being left behind with a certain situation also are ready and willing to have that experience, otherwise it wouldn't happen. And sometimes a person just might break something off prematurely from your physical interpretation, but from an energetic point, there's no further co-creation at that point that would have been beneficial. You can, of course, also consider sometimes an abbreviated life to be a mistake. But there isn't really a mistake, because even if the energy didn't feel correct then for an individual in the moment, or that is left behind, that's never happening for any reason, and therefore I highly suggest that you are aware that a person has accomplished something when they're dying. It's a success story. Every death is a success story in a way. Every death is a suicide at the right point in time, and no different for him. So I would suggest to look at this experience as something successful.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes I feel like, it was a success, like he did everything he needed to do, but I mean, sometimes it's just like really sad and tragic. But anyway, yeah, I understand like what you're talking about, like logically, but on an emotional level, it's sometimes sad. But anyway, like another question, you were talking just now about rushing through life, and I've read like 4 books about his life, and something that comes up a lot is that he basically rushed through his life. Like he only slept 4 hours a day, and he was always working on stuff, always busy, 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 always doing some project. And like that's how I am. Like you mentioned before that I'm really driven, which yes, it's true. Like I just can't sit still. Like I'm always working, working, working. Like I have like 5 projects going on at one time. And one morning, like when I had that on my mind, like I was a few days ago actually, like I was reading a book, one of the books in the Song of Ice and Fire series, and there was a quote by like a pirate who said something like, "The men of Westeros are always rushing through life. I ask you, what is the point of this? He who rushes through life rushes to his grave," or something like that. But anyway, like, do you think that Steve Irwin, one reason he died early was because he basically rushed through his life? And is that true in general? Like, if you work really hard and really fast, and you're likely to die early?
You can consider it work if you wish, and that is share it. I would look at it more as a life mission. And once you're finished, you're finished. Doesn't matter how long from your time frame interpretation the person has existed. I would look at it, how much has the person experienced, and you can stretch an experience over a longer time frame or compress it. Those is equally valid experience.
Okay.
You can also get very quickly into a deep meditative state, or you can decide to take along what you consider time. Remember, there is no time, so therefore, in your experience, you have a certain life anyway, and how far in your own third dimension experience of time you decide to give yourself in order to have all the experience you want to is entirely up to you.
Okay. Yeah, it's interesting. I'll maybe like when I do the next private session, I'll ask you some more questions about him, because I didn't get to them all today, but my time is up. So, yeah, cool. Thanks, Metax. I'll do it. I want to do a private session. I don't know, like maybe I'll wait until I move to my new apartment because my internet connection here kind of sucks. So, maybe it'll be in a few weeks, or I don't know. I move in about a month. I don't know. We'll see. I don't know when I'm gonna have it, but I'll talk to you sometime soon. Put it that way. So anyway, goodbye for now. Much love, Metax, and talk to you soon.
Much love, and talk to you in a moment that you consider soon.
Thanks.
Let me see if David needs some water.
Yes.
Metax.
Good idea.
All right, and then I will voice my question. So I think that my first question would be if you have anything you would like to say to me, or anything you sense has changed in my energy since last we spoke.
Your sacral is somewhat better, your grounding is a little worse. Overall, I would say your energy has improved. You're more centered. You are a little bit closed, or at least it could use some tweaking.
Okay. Okay. And then in an astral projection I had like a month or two ago, I met a feline character a few houses from where I live, and she looked almost like a cartoon character. So, do you know who that was?
I'm very well aware, especially from the Jacob person, and some degree David, others, that many beings in your world that don't have a direct representation and perhaps don't see beings such as myself, and so that I have a reference to what you might deem cartoon characters as the representation of what you might consider anthropomorphic felines, even though it's not really anthropomorphic, it's just the way we are structured here. Are there depictions in your world of such physical appearances that are more similar to us, even though it's not exactly like it, it's more like a caricature? So it's likely that you picked up such a version or such an interpretation of a real being, but a cartoon version because it's easier for your conscious day-to-day mind to integrate the experience.
Okay, it's not like you know that it was Sihar or someone else from your society who came by to visit.
Could easily have been Sihar, and your conscious mind just decided to depict it that way. I don't believe it's anybody I personally have a connection with here, but since you have a personal connection with CR, or at least a learning lesson or two, not necessarily someone I'm personally working with here right now in the council, as I'm standing right now in somewhat of a room that is adjacent to a council seating. So she's physically here present, as I just connected to the collective that's listening in, but it was likely a bleed-through of some sort, not a necessarily direct intention to connect to you from Sihar personally, but more your consciousness reaching out to her and then being able to perceive something about her, which your conscious mind then interpreted accordingly.
Okay. Okay, and then I'm curious if I met you or one of the other felines in the astral world, and I for some reason chose to bite you hard in the tail. Could that leave a mark on your physical body, even though I was only in the astral world?
Theoretically, it could if we were just as physical as you are, but since we are another dimensionality, it doesn't work exactly like it. That there at least would be some form of consequence, yes.
Okay, but I mean, if you were to bite my hand or something, I mean, not that you would do it, but if you did, I mean, that would not affect my physical body, right?
It likely would.
But it's just that I always hear that we humans cannot be harmed when we're in the astral world, like our physical body cannot be hurt. So, but that is not true.
Well, anything has an influence on anything. It doesn't matter on what dimensionality, and it's usually the higher dimensionality that have an easier time influencing the lower ones rather than vice versa. You can die on the astral, of course, then you're necessarily, if you have an astral experience of getting your head chopped off, you're not necessarily going to wake up without your head, but you could die, and physically you have such a sudden death for no reason, apparently. For example, a drastic example. Or your body produces a rash if you got some form of bumping in or something like it and you don't know where it came from. Also some what you consider abduction marks or something that some people refer to as physical evidence of some experience is sometimes also just astral, and your body simply produces on its own what it matches the energetic field. Remember, everything comes from the energy first, then your emotional and body, and then eventually the state of being, your mental, and then your physical body. And if it travels all the way there, then your physical body can indeed produce something from what you consider an astral experience. That's why people also get a heart attack, for example, from a nightmare. And there's also a classic example that, of course, also can be positive. When you have a certain positive experience, it also can influence your physical body in a positive manner.
Okay, right. And I mean, it's not that I'm planning to bite you in the tail if I ever meet you in the astral world. So you don't have to fear that. Just an example.
I'm very much aware of it.
Good. Okay, and then I'm watching this TV reality show called Paradise Hotel, where there's this really cute girl called Jasmine, and she's just so sweet and polite and gentle and beautiful and nice. So I'm thinking, would it be possible to kind of attract her by connecting to her energetically and feel what it would be like to have her lying right next to me? Or, I mean, can I kind of create a blueprint where then attract a person in the physical world that way, or shift a timeline where she's my girlfriend or anything like that?
Of course, anything is possible. The question is, how much are you convinced of it, and how much do you want it, and do you want the specific experience that you think of, or this particular character, or the actress, or just somebody who is like that? The more general you put out your request, the more easily you will manifest. The more specific you want it, the more likely you're going to get exactly what you want, but also it might make it more difficult. For example, if you want to meet the actress, then you might feel drawn to go to certain places or travel to certain areas where you're more likely to have that experience, and maybe also focus on it consciously and to get in the vicinity. Or, of course, if you just want to have an experience that beholding the person brings up on you, that you could easily have with somebody else to a greater degree. Or, of course, would you just like somebody who looks that way and have a romantic relationship with somebody of a particular physical representation and attract somebody that might live not far from you in that manner, or to move near you that is more likely to move there anyway compared to this one specific person. And of course, also once you have the possibility, now I'm not recommending you to start, collecting data on people in such a manner from like harassment or anything like it, but the idea of if you have the possibility to interact with a person, especially if there are some other celebrity or something in your world or something like it, then of course, then if you have some data that gives possibility to you to get near the person in certain junctures or reach out to them, then of course you would have to take those steps. Like if you wish to have a certain experience and you're being presented with an opportunity to take action, then of course you still have to take action. But again, depends if you need that particular person or want to manifest someone in your life that represents what you see in the person.
Yes, that's great. That's great point. Okay, and so how about the timeline thing? I mean, is it possible to like jump to a timeline where she is already my girlfriend? And if so, how do I jump timelines?
That requires a very strong conviction of you. So when you're asking me the question, it's likely that you're not fully willing to acknowledge that it's just as likely as you sitting there right now asking me a question.
Okay, but then if I were convinced, how would I physically go about it?
You could test drive it to some degree to convince your logical mind also of it working. For example, you take a walk through the park, or you go about your daily business anyway, and you just set out the intention in the morning. Today, I want to see a female that at least looks somewhat similar to this person. And that would then be the first step, or I want a female like this to approach me without me doing something about it, and then maybe you attract someone of a similar nature or similar outlook or other traits that might ask you for directions or something similar, as with anything else really that you want to manifest in your reality.
Okay. Okay.
And of course, if you're being presented with an opportunity to take action to get into the vicinity of the person or to reach out to her in any way, shape, or form, then do so. And of course, when you reach out and attempt communication, then go with what your heart is telling you in the moment and don't try to force any situation in order to create a connection.
Yes. Okay. And have I incarnated here on Earth this time with my usual soul group members? Or have I kind of like gone here alone while my other soul group members are on another planet or something like that?
Some of your what you consider soul group members are in your world, and some others are not discarnated as often done with what you consider a soul group, that beings are incarnating some and some others are functioning as guides. Like I'm, for example, also speaking through David right now to your collective, and others are still here on my world, so you depends how you're considering it. Some are another higher dimensionality incarnations, and they could also function as guides to you. Of course, Sihar is a certain overseer of you. It's another story, but that's a way to reference it. And then there are some that also have decided to take a physical form in your world.
Okay, and so are my current parents part of my soul group?
It's likely just an energetic connection, but sometimes you also incarnate in family units. I don't see it necessarily being the case in your current incarnation. But of course, the genetic connection alone creates also somewhat of a telepathic link up.
Okay, and then I've heard that that oversouls who incarnate on Earth typically have many simultaneous incarnations as different people, so that even though we are 7.5 billion people here on Earth, the number of oversouls involved is vastly lower. So is that true? And if so, how many oversouls are approximately here on Earth right now?
Well, there's approximately 4 to 5 people connected to what you consider an oversoul on average, but it can vary greatly.
Okay, so you're saying there's like roughly 1.5 or 2 billion different oversouls on Earth currently?
On average.
Ah, okay.
Some also might have just a few members on your planet, and others might have only one. And then again, usually there's more than just one person incarnating on Earth that is connected to what you consider an oversoul. But the non-physical world is not really just delegated to an oversoul, and then there are a few incarnations on Earth that are connected to that one oversoul. You also create new connections during your lifetime and learning lessons and contracts you establish. It oversoul is just a word that I'm referring that I know from your world, and David's mind and other beings in your world that are using such terms to refer to such concepts, but different religious ideas in your world have different interpretations that are somewhat getting to the truth of those types of incarnations, if you want to call it such. Beings also incarnate in a human form, even though they're used to another species, and you consider people that are all used to being incarnated in a certain species, in a star seed, if you will, of such a species, that then you could also term their oversoul connections or something similar, or the history, if you're talking about timelines, of beings that have incarnated or have parallel incarnations beyond the timeline in different species that are all having more or less a similar experience, adjacent and adjusted to the particular experience that a planetary body or a species or a race or a gender gives to the oversoul connection, from which the person then decides to have those incarnations simultaneously, which in your understanding would be a reincarnation.
Okay. Well, thank
Casper,
you
just
so
letting
much
you know
for
your
connecting
time.
to me today. It was lovely to speak to you again. So much love to you and your collective.
Much love to you, and I appreciate your curiosity, and good luck on your endeavors and co-creation.
Thank you.
More water. Marvel.
I had an interesting question for you regarding what you might consider ancient Greek gods. Because I've been watching some YouTube videos about people, groups of people who are petitioning and still honoring ancient Greek gods. And they are quite hyped. So I was wondering, would the Greek gods would be something like ancient aliens, something group of aliens like you who are still interested in people, or there would be something people are just connecting with, I don't know, parts of their own subconsciousness. Do they exist outside their own consciousness?
Greetings, Adam. Interesting inquiry. Those beings are necessarily Greek in nature. It's just that the people that you consider the ancient Greek came up with certain names for them, while others had others, and they interpret them in one way, others another. Once beings in your world reach out to those persons, people of a mostly human nature that had visited your Earth, you might consider them Nordic aliens or something in your modern ufology, which is really just a reflection of your older one. That this particular grouping that were there that are largely of a humanoid nature, but there were also other entities that are likely not described as godly or demonic or whatever that are not of a human nature. Some of them also relate being to our kind, at least some memories from your mythology in that particular region. So the answer is, well, people sometimes connect to their own subconscious when they're reaching out to those people and they're not aware of it, and it's just an aspect of themselves, which is not really much different. And those beings, however, are real entities that have what you then consider ancient alien or something like it experience that have walked on your Earth in what you would consider your ancient past. Some older than you might imagine, or longer ago, some not as long ago. Certainly longer than when your ancient Greek culture itself existed. So even then, that was just memory. But people have also interpreted and projected a lot of ideas on those beings over time and turned the memory of them into something else, which can also then be something somebody who reaches out telepathically interacts with rather than the actual person that visited your house. And of course, the Roman or the Nordic pantheon, India and Mesopotamian cultures, Egypt, those that you're aware of in large degree, also Atlantis. Those cultures had different names for the same people. Also in Mesoamerica, it was a group of people, but it's very popular today is your term Anunnaki that has been used for those particular entities, but there's also a lot of ideas projected onto that word in your modern mythology, which some of it is accurate, much of it is somewhat faulty, or at least a reinterpretation or misinterpretation, but again, so is your religion. And also your more modern religion, often a reinterpretation of older teachings or ideas, and the Greek understanding is not the earliest one, but also not the latest one.
Okay, yeah, it's interesting.
Hmm.
And how would you explain that many of those people are experiencing something like, I don't know, that their desires or wishes are being fulfilled, that the fact that those beings they're trying to contact are even interested in our lives? Is this a projection? Is this kind of something like a law of attraction? They're projecting their beings.
Again, those people are real, have lived on your world, and you can possibly connect to them just like you can connect to me. It is indeed possible. Their frequency is perhaps more similar to beings in your world, a same species after all, and their frequency range not as far above you, if you will. It's like a force going into fifths. However, if you send out a desire to somebody, it doesn't matter if you're asking a deity or a universe or me or whoever, you're sending out the general idea that you want something to happen in the consciousness field, no matter how you term it, will reflect something back to you. But of course, sometimes if you ask a person, the individual might also help you, which you can consider then a deity interacting in your life and making a difference. So it can be possible that some entity on the other side, be that such a person that your ancestors deemed God, is helping, or it is just a reflection of what you're sending out in law of attraction. So it greatly depends on the situation and the person.
Okay, it's quite interesting. Yeah, I was thinking also, yeah, that it could be many things. That's why I asked you.
Yes, since it can also be another thing than just the law of attraction or those entities. It can also be another entity masquerading as those ones. And since somebody is sending out such a desire and the entity is just interacting with whoever is willing to send out a desire and to present themselves in a way, also beings like myself, sometimes when we interact with people in your world, but they are not willing, for example, to connect to somebody who is not of a humanoid nature or who even has a physical form at all, I can present myself in a different fashion that people are more aware of. There are, of course, also entities that use that for what you might consider demonic overpowering or something more of a negative polarity, but those options are possible. So just because somebody's praying to what they consider one god doesn't mean the answer they're getting is really coming from that particular entity and not somebody else who is simply using this person's willingness to reach out to present themselves in a manner that's fitting to the person's desire.
Oh, interesting. Yes. So we can never really know who is another end.
To some degree, you can become aware. For example, David, I'm aware can perceive beings such as me as I'm speaking in his third eye, but of course that can also be diluted. I could also pretend or project myself as someone else. It would likely have a certain effect that would hamper the connection, etc. Depends. You can train and get better at it and perceiving who is really speaking, but ultimately, as long as you have any experience, you can never be for sure certain, but neither can you really be for certain that the physical material world around you is what you think it is in your conscious mind.
Yeah. No, they were mostly, they're hyping about Greek goddess Fortuna, who is about, the goddess is about abundance, pleasure, things like that. And one of the symbols, her symbols, is also lion. So I thought it might be somehow aligned to your energy.
More likely. Doesn't necessarily mean that she is a lioness, but some ancient worship towards her, for example, as I mentioned earlier, some of those being humanoids, other ones not so much, depending on the reinterpretation, and some entities also some names for stellar connections that have been named after certain animals on your world have likely been named after such, to not always, but in some cases to a large degree, because people came from their visiting world in your antiquity that had a certain outlook that reminded people on Earth of certain other beings in your world of a more animalistic nature, and that could have also been the case in her being presented with such an entity. of a more feline nature, of course, also in other cultures like ancient Egypt, for example, also Mesopotamian region. There are also those depictions of course, the most important or popular one is likely the reinterpreted things and others that have had a connection to mankind.
Yes, thank you. It's it's quite interesting, isn't it?
The more also you're digging and uncovering in your world, and the more your archaeologists might be more aware or become more aware of the possibility of life out here, they might also reinterpret certain evidences, and then the whole topic that you're considering, paleo, SETI, or ancient astronauts, or those ideas might become more popular or accepted in the wide field. But remember, you can't perceive something you're not the vibration of, so first and foremost there would have to be the acceptance of the possibility, and then you can find something that will also be related to those particular people, for example, that your ancestors deemed God.
Yeah, thank you. That's all for me today. Much love and thanks for explanation.
Much love to you. I look forward to the next direction.
Yes, thanks.
Hello, Metax. I really appreciate your advice from last session we had, because I've implemented some of it, and well, I've gone into a lot more of a state of ease a lot of the time, and it seems like I don't want to say I've just opened myself up in a way, but I seem to finally not so really perceive every part of myself as being a liability or something, like, or these divided parts of my consciousness. They all seem to sort of be this one uniform function. And well, I mean, I always judged myself about maybe why I was getting so hooked on addictions or something like that. And I think now I'm really starting to want to look after that part of my consciousness, because I don't want to beat it up, because I can really see it's just me. And yeah, it's almost getting into a habit of that. And when I might have a really strong desire to numb, sometimes it's like maybe like a ravenous hunger or whatever, or just anything, or you really need to look at something. I can see what the real thing is I'm saying to myself, and it's not as confusing or just cut off. They're kind of like the same answer to what I want. So if you want to speak about that, because it's almost like at times when I can accept myself in that way, I seem to come to this point of ecstasy, which feels really good, and I've had it before at times.
Yes, well, I mentioned already earlier interaction with Ryan. In your case, obviously, connecting to our kind is the easiest, beneficial way to get into that state and transmute any of those blockages that might keep you from a state of desire. I don't recommend a numbing, obviously. Best way is to just let whatever needs to come up, and then transmute whatever's there. And you're also being fine with being there, not trying to suppress it either, or needing to transmute it in the moment, just being open towards whatever wants to be resolved anyway. Simply by getting into our frequency, we're connecting to me or others.
Yes.
Kang or Myra or anyone over here.
Yes, and I noticed that as well, like last year. Physical exercise, for example, is fantastic for grounding, but at the same time you can get carried away with your ego and almost like sort of come to a resting spot where you don't really develop or anything because you let your glory take over. And I think that to some degree was happening to me, but now I can see that it's just simply there for me to make it easier to leave my comfort zone, which is the part of the reason why I numb, and it's because I desire to be comfortable too much. But
Yes, ironically, when you let go of the desire to be in a comfort zone, you will likely feel the most comfortable. Because you'll get into a state of uttermost bliss and you'll realize that you don't need to hide in a zone that you consider comfortable, and that you'll realize that existence itself can be comfortable without the necessity to delegate it or restrict it. Because the fear that you have that keeps you in the comfort zone is also usually the fear of a greater acceleration, of a greater sentiment that is usually more beneficial than what you keep yourself in the zone. In other words, take your zone with you and redefine what you need in order for your happiness, and then you will likely automatically transition it.
Yes, and that's exactly what I've been going through, I suppose. And it's interesting for some of the answers I've figured out from sort of accepting myself as the one, and also I've noticed, particularly in meditation, if I have a blockage, I'm not always trying to rat it out or find out which part of me is stuck. I just took your advice and just see myself in the way I want to be seen, and that seems to make energy flow a lot better instead of just having to chase. Well, I suppose it's just impregnable. You can't really get to it, and you can't really catch it in fully. The energy, you can't really absorb something that your body is trying to run away from anyway. If you're trying to chase it, it just makes it chaotic, confusing. So it's better to do something that's pleasurable, as you were saying, or blissful.
Mm-hmm. And remember, you cannot chase anything anyway. It's outside of you. Whatever you try to reach by defining it outside of you, you're pushing it away.
Yeah. Also, I think I might point this out because it might be a further comment. It seems like the main thing that I was unconsciously blocking off when I was coming to those like addictions was the opinion I had on the energies I'm bringing forth. So, of course, one of you talked about before about the filter that I was talking about, or the Tigress person. Well, when I connect to her frequency, I know if I keep the positive emotion like you're suggesting, I really start to see what the negative emotion was, and it seems to be, I think schizophrenia is kind of like the right word. I'm not sure if it's the perfect word, but you just really start to well, I suppose just like shake your own reality a little bit, and you kind of go, what the hell's going on? But that's interesting, and also a point when you let those emotions crop up and then you connect anyway. It's also the strongest moments I've had of bliss, at least when that happens, and I'm sure you've seen that yourself.
To some degree, but as long as you're defining it as more necessary experience, then you can make it more likely happen compared to it being just a possibility.
Right. So of course,
it's your desire to also drive it forward.
Yes, and that's correct. It's sometimes it can come very freely and open for me to just have a state of bliss, but at other times to keep the commitment strong, there seems to be a strong upheaval that happens anyway, whether I like it or not. So I think it's better for me to just take that in instead of trying to make a scenario it's not there. So I suppose something I've always wanted to bring up and never really seemed to. Last year when I was going for my usual walks and I was in much more of a flow state of bliss, I suppose when that state of bliss was a lot easier for me to achieve. It was like sort of early on in the sessions I was doing. I think later on I just started to take it in too much, and then I unconsciously started freaking out, and that's why it became a bit too hard. But earlier in that period, I typically meditated by the lake I usually do, and I started opening up to the frequencies there. Obviously, I saw geometry in my third eye when I was connecting to the trees or whatever. That's pretty normal, at least for back then. And then the energy got intense enough that I actually saw this sort of nature spirit, like you were talking about, this elf-like being who had like this translucent green, orange look to him. And he seemed to be darting around me, like he sprinted past. And it felt like my iris was almost like burned in with this information. It just was absorbing very rapidly. And I felt the heat of that, and it was very interesting. If you want to talk about those beings in particular and my connection with them currently and what I could, I suppose, be looking forward to if I play my cards right and actually keep that frequency now, what I could come to expect of that, and what would be exciting for me to see.
The opposite way around would be a good approach. First, get excited about what you want to see and then pulse that out, and then you will attract entities that will likely match the frequency, will be at such nature spirits that more are aligned with your direct forestry, mountainous region, the whole vicinity. Nature spirits a good term as any other. Elf, whatever terms doesn't exist, your world full of beings. However, you always interact with not just the physical surrounding, but also higher dimensional entities. The question is only can you perceive them or not. And in this case, you simply picked up on something that would have been there anyway or was there anyway. You just managed to get in a frequency where you saw it, the same way when you see, for example, a ship on a higher dimensionality, not necessarily your secret technology on your Earth that's quite material, but something that is indeed bleeds through from higher dimensionality is just as similar as there on the physical. It's simply a direct result of you getting to a certain frequency range where you could perceive what was there and is there around you. And if you want to have another such interaction, just get on the same frequency range again. The easiest way to do so is by getting excited about it and pulsing out what you want to experience and what would instill excitement in you, and therefore you will automatically attract then what will give you further reason to stay at that state.
Yeah, they were interacting with Kang a little bit as well, which was interesting. It was almost like that triangular relationship. I could sense like they were almost communicating with him. And he looked a little bit funny because he stood out a lot. Just like this very grounded looking figure or whatever, military guy, and they're all they seem a little bit frivolous almost, but not, I don't think that's the right term at some point. There seems to be some very, I suppose what Kalask would see as irritating beings, like almost like fairy-like beings or something that I could also sense. I didn't really see them, but they seem to be also play a role in the nature collective. So I suppose, as you're aware, and as I've been discussing with David, we've obviously had a rapid change of lifestyle and upcoming rapid change that could come to fruition. And I was wondering, it's going to be a very rapid shift in consciousness very soon. And I was wondering what I could look forward to with my own life during this shift of what, or what's exciting for me even now that's close in my vicinity that could come as something of an interest very soon. I suppose what I could look forward to, if there's anything you can catch in my frequency.
Well, connecting with certain entities can certainly increase when you're in another vicinity. Also, your telepathic link up with Fashi, if you want to train that.
Okay, so I've had a few activities actually that I've come to plan. Like I was talking about, I'm still been making this cat tent for her, which is a little bit fun. So I found some cardboard and some safety pins. Essentially just going to get an old t-shirt for me and just have some fun like that. And I think she'll enjoy that. I've been playing around with her more often now than before. So Okay, so you're saying that her higher incarnation has a close harmony, I suppose. Or, I mean, yeah, like you're talking about vicinity. So if I come into alignment, you're saying that my connection with Bushy would be one of the first things to light up.
Someday it could get more tense, or at least shift drastically in any direction. Of course, also remember, any member of our kind in your world is also an antenna. So you could also then use her, if you will, of course, in the most respectful way possible, to connect to other entities out here, if you decide to focus on. But of course, also, as long as you are only willing to get more what you consider perhaps weirder, or more willing to fully encompass those frequencies that might be very much discrepant from having a physical incarnation in your world right now as a human being. And it will be a question of how far you're willing to bridge that gap. And as you term it, schizophrenic, it's perhaps a little, well, negative connotated when you're interacting with entities that are necessarily directly physical. So, and therefore you would still somewhat define them as being in your own conscious. So therefore you're restricting your own abilities to connect to them. However, it's entirely up to you as far as you're willing to go there in that direction.
I'm willing to go all the way. May as well.
Very well.
Okay. Well, I believe that's all of my time, Metax, but as Chrissy's told me, but much love to you. Farewell. I really appreciate your input because you've certainly been one of my helpful people recently.
Sure. So I hope you can also lift up your spirit with those connections as you're going through those changes. We have pushed or someone else, and if you're really willing to go all the way, it should certainly alleviate your heart to a great degree. It might also then change you into a person that you might not recognize anymore yourself at a certain point, but your heart would certainly be more open. I would consider it greatly beneficial, but I am not willing to direct you or give you orders or tell you what to do. It is your choice.
Farewell.
Much love to you. Until our next direction.
Metax, can I see if David needs some water?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's my turn. Greetings. Metax, hi. And my cat's been giving me lots of love since it was pretty much almost my turn, coming over and rubbing on me and getting hair everywhere. It's wonderful. He's sending me love. He does. He likes his love. Me too.
So do I.
And then, and there's times where I'm doing things and he's staring at me and he's meowing and I'm like, and then it's funny. I see what position I'm in when I'm like, I am not ready yet. I got to do stuff. And then I kind of realized that I was, sometimes it's more like a self-love, just if I can go with it. But I mean, sometimes it's okay for me to be frustrated. That's fine too. But I'm realizing more that he's helping me to self-love. I suppose that would be a good way to put it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So now he went off smelling something. That's pretty funny. How are you working with equines, the horses, and do a lot of felines work with them, have connections with them, and a good relation?
I'll consider it a positive connection here as being bar, if you wish. It's a term from their language, as David has been guided to use in your world, since some of the information that was to a great degree beneficial for him to have a greater trust in the connection with our kind came from an incarnated person in your world of what you would consider equine nature. In our lifetimes, we have a more distant relationship compared to, for example, lupines and others that are perhaps more similar nature. However, our connection has been very positive. It's mostly, if you will, a parallel or past, whatever you want to call it, incarnation of David. Might also be more aware of there as Rax, who had somewhat of a seating on a military council. There might be some things that he's okay with being shared and others not, but the idea being that this is also how there was a connection made with certain defectors of an enemy army or reptilian nature, which you are now aware of as Galask. There was a certain agreement made after a lot of war and fighting that both our kind as well as equines that was reptiles, and then there was this group where there was an agreement struck after we reached somewhat of an armistice or something similar, in which then members of different species that came together at a certain military meeting or council that cooperated on perhaps a elite fighting unit or something similar, where there was indeed also beings of an equine nature, including one or the other that I had a personal interaction with myself. But some of it is even easier to relate to David himself, or rather Rax, if you will. It depends on how far he is willing to identify with this incarnation, where he had more of a direct pawn approach, if you will, direct interaction with beings of an equine incarnation. There are different ones. Some of you might consider perhaps Pegasus or other beings that are not exactly what you might consider a bipedal spacefaring civilization, that are more etheric, but some of them are indeed quite physical in the higher dimensionalities, quite tall beings similar to our height, some even taller, but somewhat more slender, good fighters, fairly loyal. Overall, a positive connection, but perhaps not as close as some others over here. That's the best way I can term it.
Wow, that was really, thanks for that was pretty cool hearing about that. Yeah,
Their
so
name is Raptor.
Raptor.
Hmm.
Nice. When I was little, I guess I used to go crazy for horses. And then for a long time I wanted to be a horse. I used to act like a horse. I used to have people ride on my back and do all kinds of stuff for a long time. And then I've also had my conflict with horses. Not that it was like their fault, but I've gotten kicked in the head, and that was my fault. Well, it's always my fault. But and all kinds of different things have happened. And then when I was a teenager, around 15 or 16, I let that go because I was interested in other things. So now I'm back with them again, and I didn't even know I was going to be able to be around so many. I've been using them to help with myself to, because they're such large beings, and certain confrontations I've had with them, they've been helping me with feeling good in my body while being around them and doing many different things besides cleaning up all their poop and stuff. So I've been having a good time finding out about myself and how I feel. So yeah, I'm not sure why I went into that. So like
Yes.
I guess I would say I have an incarnation.
Mm-hmm. In their
In
species.
in the equine.
Yes. I can't tell exactly if you're related to a raptor or any other of such nature, but definitely a higher evolved, if you will, or more intelligent equine version. Also, I would not recommend you to define things as being your fault or anybody's fault. That is implied some form of judgment, just being responsible, because it puts you more in a position of power than victimhood from your linguistics. That's just a little side note.
Yes. I was trying to control him to get him to do something, and he didn't want to because he knew he was going to run me over if I did. I was only 10, but I kept on pulling, and so that's why. but yeah. Well, with how I felt about him before, kind of like more like my first love. So yeah. And so yes, so now I'm getting back with them again, in touch with myself. Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
there are perhaps numerous individuals in your world that are becoming more aware of connections, also due to a special situation you have decided to collectively create in your world. However, it's more likely that the next of what you consider the upcoming years is going to be more common for people getting those memories that you will likely perceive as past life from your current understanding. So it might become more common in your population, or at least the willingness to accept something like this is real. And overall, the psychic paranormal phenomena, if you will, especially your other lifetime incarnations and the existence of what you consider perhaps non-human entities in the other worlds, becoming more acceptable, not necessarily with definite proof being shown to you by a scientific researcher, but overall a general willingness in the population to accept such possibilities due to your own development stage currently through a lot of upheaval, however.
Yes. I know with myself, I've had to go through a part where I'm not making other people more like gods, or worshiping them, or thinking they have a better, are able to do things better than I am. I'm realizing that I'm that powerful too, that I'm doing what I'm doing, and that I can have a connection with them more on that kind of basis.
Yes, if you love yourself, if you project a certain idea out about yourself, that's what other people have to pick up on. There's no other way around it. So be it positive or negative, whatever it is that you're pulsing out about the idea you have about yourself, any entity in your vicinity, physical or non-physical, of any species or race or any identity, will automatically respond to what you're pulsing out and feed back to you what you're thinking or having as an idea of your own identity.
Yeah.
And when you're mentioning being better or worse at something, well, there's one way to look at things is you have your own judgment. There's nothing wrong with having some of an idea of discriminating between what you prefer or what you don't prefer. It's just more recommendable if you use your own interpretations of what you want to create, what you desire, rather than using someone else's approach of what's more beneficial or less. If you operate under the idea of should or ideal comparison to what you're capable of, it's like you're operating under somebody else's pretext, which is not as helpful as when you're defining to yourself what you wish and what is better or worse in your own definition. In other words, overcome any struggles that you might have to improve upon yourself is something I recommend on your own. In other words, beat your own high score.
High school. I have dreams about being in school again, and I keep on wondering why they keep on accepting me. Like, I'm almost 50, and I'm still, they still want, I can still go to high school, and I'm like, but then I'm like, I don't even have to go anymore or to this one. And then I find myself trying to, leaving, and then I can't find my vehicle or whatever. But and then actually last night I had a dream that there was a test in school, but I had no way to get there, and I didn't even know I was going to be late, and I always feel horrible about not being able to make it. It happens to me a lot in my astral dreaming time. So yeah, I must be going to school or something. Am I schooling myself up there in there?
You're always schooling yourself. The reason you decide to also have this particular representation of it is likely also because you're still putting some form of pressure on you, where you're afraid to fail in somebody else's eyes, especially as a testing idea. However, ultimately, it's always only yourself that you have to stand in front, which is why I used the metaphor.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So one last question. Helping someone else transition on from this life, that's okay? I mean, that to others, and I mean, yeah, helping them.
Depends.
Okay, if you could talk about that for a minute, that'd be great.
Okay is a very general term, and
I
nothing
know it is.
can ever happen unless it's on some level okay. Nothing ever happens for no reason. So transitioning somewhere, of course, you could just load a shotgun and shoot a random person in the head and then be considered murder. However, on a higher level, the person already decided that they was gonna die and they were willing and they were in an energetic state ready for the experience. Nothing ever happens accidentally, even if you like to find things such as this is a tragedy or a horrible incident. And of course, somebody deliberately wants to transition and verbally states so. It's a much different situation, but ultimately, on a higher level, it's both the same. Of course, you also are responsible for your action, and the person responsible for their willingness to leave. It's always a co-creation. So ultimately, everybody decides when they want to go anyway, at all times, and you cannot force anybody outside of their body unless they have given prior consent on some level. So okay is being in general terms, everything is okay in a level. If you should do it or if it's necessary to do it, etc., just go with whatever seems right in the situation and what energy the person is passing out. Again, you're responsible for your own decision and action, and so is the other person. It's definitely, in the broader sense of the word, okay, but that can mean a lot of things.
Yes. Okay. Yeah, I think
Yes.
I believe I understand what you're saying, and I think I do too. I just wanted to know more on your perspective on that. And my time is up with you. So I love you, and I'm very glad that I was here and with you. And well, through David, but I'm with you other times, so it's fine.
Much love for you as well.
Okay.
And
Till
remember, there is no death of the soul or anything like it, only the physical body.
Okay. Much love, and talk to you soon.
On to our next direction, wherever it will be. Goodbye for now.
Okay.
Greetings, Metax. Hear me?
Greetings, Tim. You're breaking up somewhat, but I'm picking up from your speaking while I'm filling water and David.
Okay. Yeah, pleasant surprise. Wasn't expecting this tonight. Yeah.
Yes,
So,
you
is there anything you want to tell me about myself or my higher self, or any wise words you can give me?
Yes, soul connection. You were expecting this indeed, otherwise you would have not showed up, even if your ego mind is not fully consciously aware of it. You wouldn't be here if on some level you were expecting.
True. Yeah.
As with everything else, of course, but in this case, it's a good reminder.
Yeah, well, going into that, like I think I had a dream about this the other night, and I was actually perceiving what you were talking about after Zach, and about the different energies that you're putting into the group and into different individuals, and then the collective energy. And I was perceiving that in my dream. Do you understand what I'm talking about?
To some degree, but maybe you can elaborate further.
Well, I remember like perceiving everyone's different energies, and even slotting into the line where I sort of am. I just sort of fitted in sort of at the end there of the line in the dream, which is what happened tonight. And like you said, my egoic mind didn't even know this was on, yet I was having that dream. So, but it had quite an impact on me. I remember waking up thinking, oh, I've got to ask you about that. There was something else going on there, more than my egoic mind could sort of perceive.
Well, obviously, you also create your own reality from your expectation more than anything. It's something I like to explain earlier to also Casper. The idea being when you wish something, but you define it outside of yourself, and unlikely, it's a lot less likely to come to fruition in your physical reality compared to when you're expecting it on a subconscious mind, as in your case, your dream state. And very often you have certain experiences in your dream state which then become physical reality, not just a rash or something that manifests on your body, but also in your surrounding area. That you decide to create something in the physical after you basically worked on it in like a sandbox setting on the astral plane, where you're test driven it, so to speak, certain concept or experience.
So so talk about dreams. Sometimes you play things out in your dreams, whether they're nightmares or whatever you play out, and some things come to fruition, some things don't. So I could have a nightmare about something, and that maybe just be playing out of fear. Then what's the difference between that and me manifesting that fear?
It depends if you decide to carry it in your physical world. It's a very good idea and concept to bring up, because indeed you sometimes dissolve your fear in the non-physical, because you're overpowered, you learn a certain lesson, you have a certain understanding, and then you notice, are there where I was stuck for this reason, and now I discovered the origin and I can resolve it without necessity to manifest in the physical. The same reason when something is stuck in your energy, any chakra system, for example, doesn't mean you need to manifest a physical ailment unless you keep the energy there and don't dissolve it. And eventually then it will become a mental problem, emotional sensation, and then it will become a physical manifestation. Of course, it works in both negative and positive manifestations. If you cut the energy short or dissolve it before it gets to the physical, it doesn't need to manifest. Indeed, any negative experience you're manifesting, whether it's an apparent nightmare that appeared in your astral plane or something that's stuck in your energy field, where you just have a certain sensation that there is something unpleasant in a certain region, if you dissolve it, it is dissolved. If you keep it there and your ego mind ignores it, then it will likely manifest in the physical eventually. Everything happens that way. That is how your creation happens.
Yeah, I do believe that because that's something I have noticed. If I don't really change it, say if I get a nightmare about a certain scenario, if I don't implement those changes in my life, then it probably sort of is going to manifest on some level, or maybe not the exact same way, but the same sort of energetic imprint.
Yes, so it's the imprint that happens. So it's not like you dream of a car crash, and next day you have a car crash. Maybe you dream of some other negative interaction, like a physical fight, or bleeds through even from a lifetime where you have an experience that's not relatable directly to your physical reality, but it matches the frequency. But again, it happens, of course, also with the positive experiences.
We'll say with that dream, I was see what you're talking about before about the different energies, and I start perceiving energies. I only sort of realize that now because I've played it out. But beforehand, I sort of didn't really know what that dream was about. And then obviously experiencing it tonight, then it sort of all made sense. Yeah. Oh, thanks. Do you want to say anything else about that?
This is how we always manifest everything. It's also I tried to relate to Casper earlier, the whole idea that from manifesting from that plane and then creating something that physical is greatly dependent on how much you're willing to also adhere to any warning signs you're getting in terms of nightmare or positive feedback in terms of a nice dream that you wish to manifest, and how you react to those trigger points. So when you dissolve the energy, it disappears, either positive or negative. Or if you keep focused on energy, it will manifest, but it will be energy manifesting, not always the direct physical representation like the one you saw, be that positive or negative. It can be, but the more you concentrate on a detailed outcome, either from the energy of fear or love, from desire to create or fear of it being created, the more energy you put behind it, the more likely it's going to happen. Remember, the universe or God or existence or whatever doesn't understand the word no or rejection. So only the intensity of emotion that you put behind what you're thinking or having an idea about or pulsing out creates the greater likelihood, be it either fear or love, as the most greatest manifester.
So would like obviously sometimes you remember your dreams when you wake up, and sometimes you don't. So if I wake up, say for example, if I tend to remember it, does that have more impact on me, or is there any correlation between that?
It likely gives you more of an opportunity to transmute the energy in your waking state. Otherwise, it likely more remains in your subconscious mind. So it's the same way when you take certain bland matter or something similar that brings certain things up in your conscious mind that you're otherwise suppressing, that now you have the opportunity to work with it and resolve it if you wish. Otherwise, it would stay in your subconscious mind and would more likely manifest from there. But it's
that
still
makes
up
sense.
to you. Yes.
I understand. Okay. And I just wanted to ask, I don't know if you spoke about it before, but with like the incident at 9/11, were they actually physical aeroplanes that went into the building?
There were indeed airplanes present, yes, not necessarily what eventually toppled the building, but from what I'm aware of, and I'm not flying on a ship or something around your planet and observing what's going on. I'm also just reading from what you would consider perhaps your Akashic records or something similar. Likely some other impact on top of that.
Yes. So were those planes hijacked by someone?
From what I'm aware of, there was indeed a hijacking, so that the official story is not entirely made up, but there was indeed a hijacking, but the person hijacking was not necessarily hostile or not in on a larger scheme of things, so the person was allowed to hijack.
So would that person died in the impact?
Most likely. It's not a guarantee. Could have also survived somehow if got out early or something similar, but I'm not perceiving any person there surviving on impact.
Yeah, it was just a fun, curious thing that was just playing on my mind more than anything. Just got to see a documentary the other day. It's really trivial to me, but yeah, it's more fun than anything.
A person was likely being used as what I'm perceiving now as a political term that I'm aware from David as a useful idiot. Stands also somewhat of an insult, but in this case being more of a political description of a person for one agenda being used by another person of another agenda without their full awareness of what they're being used for.
That makes sense. Yeah. So did the government know about it, or the US government know that it was going to happen?
Depends on your definition of government. Secret Services most likely, if the official president at the time or any other official government outlets were fully aware of it, is another story. So what parts of what you described as the label government likely were aware?
Yes, I guess there's shadow parts of the government and more forward parts of the government. Yeah, okay. Well, that's fine. That's all I really want to speak about.
With your government ideas in numerous of your countries, there's what, if you will, shadow governments or official governments, etc. It's not necessarily a clear line between those either. Most of your governments are different than what they present themselves into the public, but that's also very common in your world in general, that you have official versions of everything, and then if you will, a conspiracy behind things. It depends on how far you're willing to stretch it and
Yeah,
how
sure.
far you're even interested in any of those details. They don't directly influence your life in most cases.
Yeah, so say like China and America may be against each other on one level, but on another level they may work with each other. So I imagine it's pretty complex, not so straightforward.
And others
Okay.
that might agree on the surface are fighting each other in the background over other things. That's also just part of your third dimensional experience.
Interesting. Okay, that's all I want to speak about, Metax. So yeah, I'll just sign off, mate. Much love, buddy.
I love you, and I look forward to any further interaction that we might have, and I will also oversee any connection that you might facilitate with reptiles to make sure to use the connection. Much love to you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Well, Metax, we've reached the end of the queue for today, and I just want to express my love and thanks for you in this interaction today and for our group consciousness. And until next time.
Until our next interaction,
Much love, Metax.
thank you as well, and much love to the entire group. And I am finishing off our collective agreement on working on us as a group and the energy field that I described at the beginning of interaction. Goodbye for now. I look forward to our next time. Much love.
Well, Metax.